श्रीमन्तं श्रीरमणेश्वरं गुरुवरं योगासनाध्यासितं ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणेश्वरं ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणेश्वरम् ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणेश्वरम् हृदयकुहरमध्ये केवलं ब्रह्ममात्रं यहमहमिति साक्षादात्मरूपेण भाति हृदि विषमनसा स्वं छिन्वतामुच्यताव पवनचलनरोधा आत्मनिष्ठो भवत्वम्। Namo Ramana. We will commence the Friday evening Atma Vicharam by reading Bhagavan's Upadesham from the book Ramana Answers, Self-Enquiry 1900 to 1950, a compilation of all the answers given by Bhagavan on Atma Vichara, self-enquiry, and the compilation has been done by our founder, President Sri A.R. Natarajanji. And after reading the Bhagavan's Upadesham, we will meditate on his Upadesham by his grace, and then have a 20 minutes Atma Vichara session. Following that, our President Sarada would be talking about Atma Vichara as it has been contemplated in Ramana Gita. Ramana Gita is a compilation of all the answers given by Bhagavan to various devotees in Sanskrit by Ganapati Muni. And finally, we will have the concluding prayers to Bhagavan. In this section, we have been reading Bhagavan's answers between 1936 to 1950. We have reached the 62nd question. The devotee is asking Bhagavan, what is the practice of self-enquiry? The question is, what is the practice of self-enquiry? Bhagavan says, practice consists in withdrawal within the self every time you are disturbed by thought. Meditation, devotion, and repetition of sacred mantras are aids to keep out the multiplicity of thoughts. A single thought prevails, which too eventually dissolves in the self. The question is, what is the practice of self-enquiry? Bhagavan is saying, practice consists in withdrawal within the self every time you are disturbed by thought. Meditation, devotion, and repetition of sacred mantras are aids to keep out the multiplicity of thoughts. A single thought prevails, which too eventually dissolves in the self. The question here is clearly about the practice of the self-enquiry. And Bhagavan is saying the practice includes every time withdrawal back into the self whenever a thought disturbs. A thought itself is a disturbance. Often as sadhakas, we don't understand the gravity of a thought. We think there are some thoughts that may be allowed to be lingering around, and therefore some thoughts alone which disturb us has to be tackled or attended to. But Bhagavan very clearly says that all thoughts are sorrowful. It is sorrowful because in that one undivided self, the idea of a division, the idea of a thinker has been entertained, and therefore one has arisen as a limited being with a thought, and both of which, the limited identity as well as the thought, is a potential problem which may not be seen immediately, which can be only realized by enough and adequate self-enquiry, that why, instead of being in that peaceful state of oneself, why would one have to take this limited identity, take this thought, and get constrained by it? And therefore, Bhagavan says self-enquiry brings about that realization by repeatedly inquiring every thought. When we repeatedly inquire every thought, to whom is this, who am I, and withdraw ourselves from the thought back to the self, Bhagavan is saying with repeated practice, this realization comes about. Why at all rise as an identity, a limited being? Why at all hold on to a thought? Why at all then put the effort of questioning? All of this is only because, like that cow, which example which Bhagavan says, which is not happy or which believes that there is happiness outside in the field, just moves around into the open field and gets beaten up, only to come back into the shed where it was supposed to be, until it realizes that the same sweet grass of happiness is very much available in the shed that it is, and then stops, even if it is untied, says Bhagavan, it stops going wandering around. And Bhagavan says it is like even if the windows or the doors of the house are open, if one is not seeing through it, then it doesn't matter. So even when essentially when the mind is completely withdrawn into the self and no more this individual idea is entertained or even looked into, then the fullness of the self alone is, and one is actually the individuality is completely lost in it. And then, even though the eyes, the senses, and all may be there, as the doors and windows are maybe open, but if we are not seeing through them, it doesn't matter if they are there and it is open. Here also, Bhagavan is saying the withdrawal into the self is the most important practice that we need to do. And that practice brings about the clarity that the fullness of happiness is actually oneself. And by holding on to an idea that I am Dilip or I am a limited being, then giving attention to it, and then to the thoughts of that thinker, the whole problem is being given rise to. When this realization comes, and then completely even this act of withdrawing or attending, both will be given up. The self, which alone is, which is the fullness, where there is absolutely no division, no thoughts, would be realized as one's nature. So there is no more tat and tvam, the asi, the being alone is seen as the reality. And we can, how do we see it? Yesterday in the Atma Vichara session in the evening, we were trying to see how this we see in Bhagavan. Bhagavan, unlike the sadhakas that we see that he, when he had to move from Madurai to Tiruvannamalai, he did not write his name because the identity with the self is so clear. No more this identity with the individuality is there. It is evidently shown by Bhagavan. He doesn't put his name, he puts a dash. Because that is the experience in which he is. And he says that to think is impossible for me because there is no thoughts in that self. So Bhagavan goes on to reveal how the identity with our own self has to be done. That is the true abidance. Repeatedly, as we see that we abide by withdrawing everything, more and more we see that what Bhagavan is saying or Bhagavan did seems to be natural in oneself. That there is no name, there is no form, there is absolutely no thoughts except the pure being, the pure presence. So Bhagavan is going on here while that is the final goal, like the final toll of the ego is paid. Paid in the sense one recognizes it is one's own idea of limitation that is causing the misery and finally decides to give it up. If one couldn't do it still, then Bhagavan is saying the meditation, the devotion, and the repetition of all the sacred mantras are a good aid. Good aid in the sense that by holding on to that practice, we can let go the whole gamut of different practices the mind can get involved into. We drop away the multiplicity, says Bhagavan, because we constantly attend to this one sadhana, and that is the aid. Therefore, it is an aid. Even that sadhaka, that person will be finally absorbed, says Bhagavan. He says that even that single thought prevails, which too eventually dissolves in the self. In that self, absolutely no division is there or entertained. In that pure fullness, until we reach that fullness, Bhagavan says, no matter how many thoughts come, no matter whatever is the nature of those thoughts, whether it is good, bad, ugly, spiritual, we have to recognize the thinker as arisen. A limited identity is entertained by the attention, by the outward turned attention. And therefore, we should diligently, says Bhagavan says, we should diligently inquire then and there, recognizing this by putting the question, to whom is this thought? Seeing that it is for me, the thinker, immediately inquiring, who am I? By turning to the source of the I, which is nothing but the pure being consciousness, which we already are here and now, and turning and withdrawing like the tortoise withdraws everything back into the shell. We should withdraw everything back into the self. And by repeated practice, Bhagavan assures that the mind will gain enough strength to eventually let go the first and the foremost division as well and abide in the self by his abundant grace. With the abundant grace of Bhagavan, with which alone we have come to this most direct path, which consciously makes us recognize the error and the solution. With the immense grace of Bhagavan, for the next 20 minutes, let us do Atma Vichara. Namo Bhagavate Shri Ramanaya. Morana, over to Shardanka.
Namo Ramana. Just join you in a minute. Namo Ramana. Prostrations to Ramana, shining as a self in all beings. By the immense grace of the self manifest as Ramana, in this satsang, we are meditating on self-enquiry as well as having a practice session of self-enquiry. And in this part of the satsang, we are meditating on Bhagavan's teachings as recorded by Ganapati Muni in the Ramana Gita. We are on chapter 7, which is exactly on the subject of self-enquiry. And in this chapter, we first had Karshni, a devotee of Muni, who was also then, by Muni's injunction, all his devotees and disciples came to Bhagavan and surrendered to him as Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi. Muni said, just as I have done so, I would ask all of you to do so as well. So they all came to Bhagavan, and in the course of the following years, these conversations happened at Virupaksha cave and later at Skandashramam. These question answers by the different disciples of Muni to Bhagavan. And they were all earnest sadhakas, tapasvis, and they have asked all these questions. And later, Muni has recorded the questions and answers and compiled them and classified them into 18 chapters on the lines of the Bhagavad Gita. And this is called the Ramana Gita. So we are on the 7th chapter, and in this, Karshni, in the first very opening of the chapter, he has asked Bhagavan as to what is the definition or what constitutes the actual practice of self-enquiry, and what are the benefits accruing from the practice of self-enquiry. So Bhagavan answers that the I thought is the center of all thoughts, the fulcrum, and to search for the source of the I thought constitutes self-enquiry. He has also told us that the highest good accrues from the practice of self-enquiry. In an earlier chapter, in chapter 3, we find Daivarata asking Bhagavan as to what is the paramount duty of a human being. And Bhagavan has said self-abidance is the paramount duty of a human being. If we combine these two statements of Bhagavan, we can say that self-enquiry is the way in which we can perform our paramount duty. By performing self-enquiry, by practicing self-enquiry, we would be in the highest good, in the highest state, which is the result of all actions, it's the highest fruit, it's the fruit of all actions, says Bhagavan. And by this, we would also be performing our own paramount duty. So, Bhagavan says there is no greater good than that accruing from self-enquiry. And having said this categorically, Bhagavan then also says that other paths may give success, sometimes success which makes one wonderstruck. Adbhuta siddhaya sadhya. So other paths, other practices, see, when we see any success in any walk of life, when we see people who are successful, we feel quite wonderstruck when we listen to a great singer or watch a great dancer, when we watch a great accomplished sportsman, or we listen to a great orator. In any walk of life, we feel amazed by their capacity, their skill, the ability to express that skill. So Bhagavan says, Adbhuta Siddhaya Sadhya. In spiritual life also, sometimes we feel that people are way ahead of us. There is this tendency of the mind to compare. And it looks as if some people are so good, they seem to be so detached, so capable of taking everything that comes life's way, and all the time calm, very affectionate to everyone. They seem to be in a perfect state. So we tend to compare. But we do not know. Sometimes even a person not following a spiritual path can be in a very exalted spiritual state. But the question is that person abiding in the self all the time, as naturally as one says now that one is man, so naturally is a person abiding in the self. Adi Shankaracharya, describing this, he says in his poem, I think that is, I don't remember the title, which actually says that without Atma Vidya, any other thing is absolutely no use. And he says in that poem, he says, Anatma Nigrahanam or something, Anatma. Well, I don't remember it exactly, but that it starts with Anatma. So anything that is Anatma is of no use. In that he says, even if you are ruling the world of Shambhu, Shambhor Loke Shasito Va Tatakip, if you have become the ruler of the world of Shambhu, if your abidance in the self is not steady, it is of no use. So he gives a list of great achievements in that shloka of his, great achievements, where for each achievement he ends with the statement that if this has been achieved, but if one is not abiding steadily in the self, then tatakim, what of it? What has been achieved? So Bhagavan has told us here in Ramana Gita, Adbhuta Siddhaya Sadhya Upayantara Taschaya Tah Praptopi, even if one has attained such great siddhis, scaled such great heights, Bhavati Ante Vicharena Eva Nirvrataha. One becomes free only through Atma Vichara. So, then Karshri went on to ask, if that is the case, who is qualified to pursue Atma Vichara? If that is the real path to be undertaken, that is the only path which will lead to liberation in completeness, then who is qualified to walk that path? And how can one know whether one is qualified or not? Can one judge one's own fitness to take up the path? Bhagavan then went on to tell us that because of practice or because of some sukrita, some good done in earlier lives, if there is a drishti, a manasika drishti, a mental attitude of drishti dosham, dosha drishti, okay, a dosha drishti towards the body and the object, sarire vishayeshu cha. So if one is aware of the futility of engaging with objects, if one is aware of the futility of being attached to the body, of acting from the body idea, if one is aware of this futility, then self inquiry becomes a great boon to such a one. That's what Bhagavan says over here. And he says, even if the mind moves among objects, it may have to move among objects. Manasa charato yasya vishayeshva ruchir vrisham. Such an attitude of indifference to objective experience should not be only when the eyes are closed, only during the time of self-inquiry, but at all times. To indicate this, Bhagavan says, even when the mind moves in the midst of objects or among objects, even then, when the concept of dehe anityam, dehe charityata buddhi, tam prahur adhikarinam. So, even when the mind is moving among sense objects, at that time one may get carried away. Afterwards, one may think, oh, all this was absolutely unnecessary, it is not going to lead me anywhere, this is Maya, this is Mithya, we may say that. But when in contact with a particular experience, at that very moment, if we are able to say, this experience is only transitory. It is transitory because every experience is dependent on, springing from the Dehatma Buddhi. I am the body idea. That's how every experience springs. So Bhagavan says, if one has the idea, Dehe cha anityata buddhi. If one recognizes body is transitory, it cannot give us lasting joy, then any experience of a Vishaya, of an object, will be known to be equally transient, because that experience is based on one's own body idea. So if the body idea itself is transient, then what of all the experiences springing from the body idea? What about all the sense experiences? What about other experiences? Even subtle intellectual experiences are all linked with this I am the body idea. So Bhagavan says at all times, if this I am the body idea is being questioned, it's not being accepted, then one is ready for self-inquiry. And by these very qualities, one may recognize that one is ready. When one begins to feel that this body is temporary, transient, it is passing, dehe cha, dehe nashvarata buddhi, vairagya vishayeshu cha. And because of that, when one has this passion towards objective experiences, one may know that one is ready to practice self-inquiry. So this is what Bhagavan has said. One's readiness, he has talked about. The readiness is connected directly to an indifference to experiences, mental experiences springing from an awareness that all these are linked only to the I am the body idea, which in itself is not true. So, questioning that is the way of self enquiry. But Karshni goes on to ask whether if we are ready for self-inquiry, say a person is ready for self-inquiry, then is it okay to continue with our earlier practices which we may have been accustomed to? Because this is a question which comes up in many minds. One may not come to self-inquiry at the very outset of one's spiritual practice. Some people may. Then they will not have this conflict. But others may come to may have done some sadhana, put in some spiritual effort through using different methods of spiritual practice. At that point, one may suddenly be gifted with the knowledge of self-enquiry. Then the question arises whether we should continue our earlier practices or not. Based on this concept, it may perhaps be that Karshni asks, Snanam Sandhya Japo Homah Swadhyayo Deva Pujanam Sankirtanam Tirthayatra Yagyo Danam Vratanicha. He has listed a few other practices. Snanam, that is the observance of the ritual baths, the timings, the orthodox discipline, the discipline of orthodoxy, because many follow that, snanam. Or it may also be snanam in sacred rivers, bathing in sacred rivers. So this is snanam, and this is of significance. In a sense, we are just about to have Deepavali the next week. In the Deepavali festival, a very important ritual is the snanam, having the bath. It is called Ganga Snanam. The ritual bath on the day of Deepavali is called the Ganga Snanam. People having Ganges waters in their homes in some kind of sealed form will add a little bit to the bath water, and after that morning bath at a stipulated time. It was our practice when we were young. Many people used to call, my grandparents used to call from Chennai, from different places we would receive calls, or my parents might make calls themselves to others asking, is the Ganga Snanam over? Ganga Snanam acha. That was a very important part of Deepavali. Is it over? Have you done? Have you taken the ritual bath of bathing in the Ganges? That is how it is thought of on that day. So snanam, the snanam, then sandhya, the observance of the ritual of sandhya vandana. So those who are initiated into the sacred thread, and in that they are given the mantra of Gayatri and stipulated to do the Sandhya Vandana in a prescribed manner 3 times, where the Sandhya is the Sandhi, where the two parts of a day come together, joining that Sandhi. That is when the dawn and when the night and the morning come together at dawn. Similarly, when the day and the night come together in the evening, that is a dusk time. And in between, when the first part of the day and the second part of the day conjoin together, there is a sandhi in the noon time. So it is prescribed to do the Sandhya Vandana. And this is practiced as a very, very sacred ritual. Now, so Karshni is asking, Sandhya, Sanam, then he said Sandhya, Japaha, the practice of japa, mantra japa, very, very sacred repetition of the initiated syllables, or the syllables which are taken to be sacred, which some of which do not need initiation, like the Ramanama. It is said that anyone can say the Ramanama. One does not need special initiation to say Rama Rama Rama. Or it can be similarly, we say Arunachala, or we say Om Ramana. But there are also some other mantras which have been given with the stamp of authority by devotees like T.K. Sundaresh Iyer, who has put his stamp of authority and got sanction from Bhagwan for the practice of the mantra Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. So there may be such, and there may be others which are not known to much to the world, and therefore they do not question the person or say anything. They do not say whether are you having the fitness, the right to perform this mantra. That is not asked. When you can perform, there are certain mantras. There are other mantras for which one has to have a proper initiation from a guru who has adhikara to impart that mantra. So there is the power of the mantra comes to you only when you have received it in the through the formal initiation from a guru. The power of mantra, much has been said about the power of mantra, much can be said about the power of mantra japa, the nama mahima, the glory of the name. Sadhu Om Swami says all gifts, just as Bhagavan says that sarva klesha nivritti syat phalamatma vicharatah, Sadhu Om Swami says phalam elami vadum Sadguru Namam. Sadguru Namam, he says, and in that song he says, if you can go and have a bath in the Ganges, then your papa will go. If you stand under the celestial tree Kalpataru or in front of the celestial cow Kamadhenu, they will give you what all you seek. But Ramana Namam, Sadguru Namam, idellam, everything is given to the Nama. So there is a Nama Mahima. So he is asking Snanam, Sandhya, Japaha, Homaha. Homa, you may perform sacrifices. Swadhyayo, you perform all your prescribed rituals. There are certain rituals prescribed for a brahmachari, some for a grihastha, some according to the ashrama dharma. There are prescribed rituals. So to perform all of them, Swadhyaya. Deva Pujanam, to worship God. Sankirtanam, to sing, to enjoy the name of Bhagavan. Tirtha Yatra, to visit sacred places. Yajna, to perform great yajnas. Dhanam, to give, to be munificent, to be a munificent giver. Vrata Nicha, to observe ritual practices like the vrata of not eating at a particular time, of not sleeping. These are all ritual observances. All these, he is asking, vichare sadhikarasya, if one person is already ready and ripe to perform self-enquiry, vairagyacha vivekataha, and the person has viveka there. The person knows that all sense experiences are transitory and has great dispassion as well towards them. For such a person, kim va prayojanayasya uta kala vidutaye. Kim va prayojanayasya uta kala vidutaye. Is this of use? Which self-enquiry? If one is already ready for self-enquiry, then should one practice all these? Can one practice anything else other than self-enquiry? If one does so, are such practices of any use, or are they all a waste of time? Any other practice other than self-enquiry? After one knows oneself, to be ready for self-inquiry? This is the question. And Bhagavan answers, Arambhinam kshiyamana raganam adhikarinam karmanyetani sarvani bhuyasyaiश्चित्त shuddhaye. All these karmas will result in purification of the mind, chitta shuddhi, for those who are beginners in the practice of self-inquiry. Arambhinam, those who have just begun the practice of self-inquiry. Shiyamana raganam, for those for whom attachments are waning, have begun to wane, not fully disappeared. Attachments have begun to wane, and then they also are beginners in the path of self-inquiry. For such people, karmanyetani sarvani bhuyasyai chitta shuddhaye. All such practices, the spiritual practices, the religious practices lead to chitta shuddhi, purification of the mind. And hence they would be supports or supplements to the practice of self-inquiry, says Bhagavan in this verse. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya.
Apara Satchit Sukhabaridashe Yasyormimatram Bhuvanam Samastam Guhahitam Tam Ramanam Gabhiram Chintavihinam Hridhi Chintayami Chintavihinam Hridhi Chintayami.